Imagine being so addicted to a game that you spent a full 10 years just to reach the final boss room. And now, when you finally get there, you discover that it was all just a test to determine whether you are worthy of stepping into this world or not. What's more, you've become the barbarian character you chose to complete the game. This is the story of our protagonist, a guy who was always weak, spent a lot of time in the hospital, and was addicted to gaming, just like me. However, he grew frustrated because good games weren't being released like they used to be. Finally, he found a forum discussing a new game. The game was said to be very different from others, requiring 100% effort from the player. The game's name was Dungeons & Stone, an indie RPG with 2D graphics. At first, the protagonist didn't find the game exciting because it was available only in English. But since it was free, he decided to give it a try. When it was time to select a character, there were several options: human, dwarf, elf, barbarian, and furry. There was also a mysterious option with 3 question marks, which seemed to be a random or secret character. He randomly selected the barbarian, thinking he wouldn't play the game for long. Initially, the game didn't seem impressive to him, but within minutes, he was completely hooked, losing track of time. The game featured unique classes and mechanics. Some were highly useful, while others were completely useless. You had to form alliances with NPCs, and if you died, you had to start all over again. At first, this mechanic felt exciting, but as he kept dying repeatedly, he grew frustrated. Despite this, he refused to give up. He played the game in the hospital, then during his time as a civil servant, through college, and even while working a job. Through it all, he never stopped playing Dungeons & Stone. But despite his persistence, he kept dying again and again. 9 long years passed like this, and now he had finally reached the final boss room. After reaching the Abyss Gate, he breathed a sigh of relief and even celebrated, thinking that no one else could have dedicated 9 years to this game like he did. Now, the biggest question was whether to enter the boss room or not. When he selected yes, the game warned him that he might not be able to return and asked if he was sure. The warning felt almost as if the game itself was cautioning him. But the protagonist didn't care and confirmed his decision. As soon as he selected yes, the game began loading, and he started imagining what the final boss might be like. Then the game revealed something shocking. It told him that reaching the Abyss Gate only marked the completion of the tutorial. The protagonist was stunned. How could the game consider this a tutorial? His frustration grew even more as the game text suddenly changed to Korean. Angry, he thought about all the time he had wasted. At that moment, the game confirmed his target, and strange light began emanating from his monitor. The light engulfed him completely, and he felt a sharp pain as his body was pulled in. His consciousness started fading, and in the distance, he heard a voice. The voice grew louder and louder, congratulating young warriors for stepping into a sacred realm to become true warriors. When he opened his eyes, he realized that everything had changed. Wherever he looked, there were torches, and around him stood strong, muscular barbarians. His own body felt completely different, fit, covered in hard muscles and tattoos. Above all, an old man was shouting, asking everyone to pick their weapons. It dawned on him. He had become the very barbarian character he had selected in the game. The old man continued calling warriors forward to pick their armaments. The first one was Van, the third son of Carrick, who chose a double-headed axe. As soon as he selected his weapon, it was announced that he had become a warrior. Then another warrior, Fin-Eyed Annie, was called forward. One by one, everyone started choosing their weapons. The old man blessed them, saying, "May the grace of Raftonia be with you, young warriors." At that moment, the protagonist finally understood that he was truly inside the world of Dungeons & Stone. Not only had he become a barbarian, but he was also now living as the character he had chosen. As he tried to process what had happened, someone nearby muttered, "This can't be real." A terrified barbarian standing next to him said aloud that they were all inside the Dungeons & Stone game. Hearing this, the protagonist realized he wasn't the only one trapped in this strange world. Suddenly, the old barbarian shouted, "Who spoke? Was it you?" The protagonist, shocked, screamed that it wasn't him and angrily glared at the person who had actually spoken. The old man stared at the protagonist and said, "It was you, wasn't it?" The barbarian quickly asked, "Are we really inside Dungeons & Stone?" Without hesitation, the old man walked straight up to him and decapitated him. The old man then shouted, Cadlia's son was possessed by an evil spirit. He ordered the rest of the barbarians to erase everything the evil spirit had said from their minds and continue with the ceremony. The protagonist suddenly understood 3 critical pieces of information. First, people like him, who had entered this game world, were seen as evil spirits. Second, if anyone found out about his true nature, he would be killed. Third, if he had spoken earlier, his own head would now be lying on the ground. The old man then called for the fourth son of Senik to step forward. Seeing this situation, the protagonist grew increasingly anxious as people were being called one by one. Worse, those like him were being summoned as well. He devised a plan. If no one stepped forward within 2 seconds of their name being called, he would go instead. Soon, a name was announced. Bjorn, son of Jadal. The protagonist counted 1, 2. When no one came forward, he decided to step out. It was then revealed that his name was Bjorn, the son of Jadal. As the protagonist stepped forward, he noticed the old man glaring at him. The old man instructed him to choose any weapon he liked. There were several options to pick from. The weapon chosen by the protagonist caught the old man's attention. It was a shield. The protagonist believed the shield was the best option. Meanwhile, outside the game, the computer automatically updated with a notification. Object's overall level increased by +24, and this information was sent to the administrator. We were also shown the protagonist's status. When he had initially chosen the Barbarian class, he had picked a sword because it looked powerful. However, there was a major problem. He kept dying repeatedly, just like a noob. Even monsters seemed confused by how often he died. He tried two-handed axes, maces, hammers, everything, but the results were always the same. He would enter berserk mode and die again. One day, while wandering through a town, he came across a shield. It was different. He then realized that the Barbarian class had high vitality, which made it perfect for tanking. Initially, learning how to use the shield was challenging because it took time to master the skills associated with it. But later, when he began defeating stronger monsters, he became almost invincible. In fact, the Barbarian class turned out to be completely overpowered, which is why he chose the shield. With the ceremony complete, the gates to the labyrinth opened. The town housing the labyrinth was called Rafdonia. On the leader's orders, everyone rushed inside. They were all moving together, but had no idea where they were going. Suddenly, the person leading them turned around and admitted, "I've forgotten the way." Angered, everyone forced him to resign from his temporary leader position. Next, Fennel, the second daughter of Enro, took the lead. The protagonist observed the situation quietly. A moment later, Fennel announced that she, too, had forgotten the way. She looked dejected, and the protagonist realized this couldn't continue. However, he also couldn't afford to stand out too much. He pulled her aside and pointed toward a group that seemed to be heading toward the labyrinth. He suggested they follow that group. Fennel understood his point and quickly informed everyone that she now knew the way. Shortly after, they found the labyrinth entrance. The protagonist began to wonder whether entering was the right decision. He considered leaving the Barbarian group entirely. His life in the other world had been spent sick and bedridden. He had never fought before. Could he really defeat monsters here? At the very least, he needed to pay the game's taxes. In Dungeons and Stone, taxes were mandatory after the age of 20. Those who didn't pay were literally killed. There were 2 ways to earn money: enter the labyrinth to fight monsters, or take humble jobs in bars or markets. But there was a problem. As a barbarian, his reputation was that of a wild and destructive individual. This was due to the game's setting. On the upside, barbarians were given weapons from the start. The downside was that the labyrinth only opened once a month, and there were just 10 minutes left before it closed. The protagonist was still stuck in his dilemma when Fennel grabbed his hand and pulled him forward, urging him to hurry. The portal was shrinking. He told her to go ahead, assuring her that he would follow. Before leaving, she thanked him. He said there was no need, but she insisted she wanted to learn how to be as smart as him. She had never seen such an intelligent barbarian and aspired to be like him. He thought to himself that she would have to be reborn in another class to achieve that, as barbarians were inherently foolish. Not wanting to hurt her feelings, he simply said, "Just think and act like a normal person." She happily thanked him again and promised to reward him if he returned alive from the labyrinth. He wondered what kind of reward she would give and whether something might develop between them. However, what stuck with him was the phrase, "if you return alive." Barbarians in this game were not afraid of death. They didn't care about it. The protagonist asked her, "Are you afraid of dying?" She ponders for a while and asks, "Isn't it obvious?" Yes, she is afraid, but she is a born warrior. If you don't know how to fight, you're not a barbarian. This realization makes it clear to her that she has to enter the labyrinth. So be it. Being a barbarian, she has learned to conquer her fears. Now she moves deeper inside. In the dungeon, visibility is almost zero. When we talk about dungeons and stones, protagonist is a veteran. He knows there should be crystals on the walls to at least light some of the way. But here, he realizes he's been thrown into sheer darkness. This has never happened before in his 9 years of gaming experience. He proceeds cautiously, feeling the walls as he moves. As he senses that his pace is too slow, he steps into a bear trap. Nearly screaming in pain, he stifles his voice, knowing that an enemy might be nearby. Guess what? Protagonist is right. Hidden in the darkness is a small but sinister creature. The worst part? These creatures are cunning and only attack when you're severely weakened. Despite the pain and frustration, he chastises himself for whining. Instead, he shouts, challenging the goblin for a fight. Standing tall despite his numb leg, which has been trapped, protagonist's anger intensifies. He curses the goblin and even despraying the labyrinth. Just then, he hears the creature's footsteps, confirming that his shouting is working. Protagonist pretends to run, baiting the creature. He walks, it walks. He stops, it stops. Seeing this, protagonist devises a new plan. He collapses entirely, playing dead to fool the goblin. The creature stands at a distance, watching to confirm if protagonist is truly lifeless. Then it starts throwing stones at him, testing if he's alive. This enrages protagonist. He realizes that this goblin might be even smarter than the barbarian who failed to find the labyrinth's secrets. As the goblin approaches, protagonist makes a critical error. He misses an attack. To make matters worse, the goblin laughs at him, mocking his failure. Protagonist's blood boils. Driven by sheer rage, his body reacts instinctively, attacking the goblin repeatedly. He might have destroyed it completely. That's the true strength of a barbarian. Raw, untamed madness. After defeating the goblin, protagonist gains experience points, and the creature's body vanishes, leaving behind a small crystal, the game's currency. This 9th grade magical gem is worth only as much as a piece of bread. It's now crystal clear. This is a world of dungeons and monsters, a land of familiar landscapes and various game races. Protagonist realizes this is the same game he played for 9 years, but if this is his new reality, he will only find out by dying. Dragging himself, leaving trails of blood, protagonist crawls for what seems like 10 miles. At one point, he sees a light at the end of the cave. Just as he's about to give up, he notices a group of people staring at him. By now, protagonist is on the verge of death, with only 2% life remaining. A notification appears. Permanent sanity point gained. Protagonist tries to speak, but his low health prevents him. The group questions how a beginner could have made it this far, as it seems impossible. Protagonist, irritated, feels an urge to punch the helpers. The group leader remains calm and asks someone named Racina to heal the barbarian. Protagonist wonders, do they have a priest in their team? Maybe I'll survive. But Racina refuses without reason. The leader, expecting this, asks another member to offer a potion. The healer reluctantly agrees, explaining that divine powers might be needed later, but potions could suffice for now. The potion is poured on protagonist's foot, which regenerates rapidly but comes with excruciating pain. Protagonist screams in agony, but soon his foot is as good as new. He stands up, though this healing wasn't free. The group now wants information. How did a beginner like him end up here? Protagonist honestly admits he doesn't know. He just stumbled into the dungeon. According to protagonist, even he has no idea why he ended up in this dungeon. Palladino says this phenomenon only occurs once in 100 years. Protagonist laments his terrible luck. After gathering all the information, he announces that he won't need to pay for the potions because, in this labyrinth, time is money. Protagonist finds it odd that these people are investing so much time in him. Still, he feels good about surviving. The group moves in the direction protagonist came from, following a blood trail. After a while, the potion vendor remarks that Barbarian is lucky. The blood guy agrees, mentioning he endured such trials at the beginning of the game, saying it's not something ordinary. The woman adds that the red-haired guy avoided using potions, and the blood leader ended up saving protagonist instead. The potion vendor doesn't deny this, but points out that the priest also did the same. The environment becomes tense. While exchanging harsh words, they begin to speculate about how far Barbarian's blood has spread. Archer wonders whether this was truly luck for Barbarian. The group continues walking until they finally stop, facing the portal to the labyrinth's second floor. Seeing this, the group feels elated. However, as they are about to enter the portal, the woman says, "Stop," and asks if what they see lying there is Barbarian's saddle. The old man, excited, uses light magic to illuminate the path they had traveled. The blood trail is still visible, shocking everyone. The old man asks the leader how far Barbarian managed to travel. The blood guy estimates about 10 miles. This realization dawns on the group. If this individual managed to crawl so far alone, he must possess monstrous strength. The red-haired man shivers at the thought, wondering if he could have endured such a trial himself. He recalls seeing Barbarian extending his right hand and showing a magic gem. This means that Barbarian crawled this far, unsure if he'd survive, yet never let go of his bargaining tool, as he desperately clung to life. The red-haired immediately retracts his earlier statements and even asks Barbarian's name. Until now, everyone had assumed Barbarian was a mindless race bent on slaughter, but this individual seems different. Switching back to protagonist, he fights goblins, defeating them using only his shield and fists. He learns their patterns and tackles traps scattered along the way. When goblins attack from behind, he turns and beats them with his shield. However, he faces one problem: hunger. The tribe leader had given him a bag of food, but it tore apart, leaving him with only 2 out of 7 pieces of bread. Realizing he must ration carefully, he eats a bit of bread, remarking how delicious it is. But now he is thirsty, wondering where he might find water in this dungeon. He reflects on how the game didn't require drinking water. Now, in this real-life scenario, the challenge feels much harder. Protagonist, frustrated, gets up to search for water. Eventually, he hears the sound of running water and spots someone drinking in a corner. As protagonist approaches, the person leaves. He counts his crystals, finding he has about 40. But now, a new problem arises: fatigue. He knows he needs sleep. In the dungeon, there are 2 ways to sleep. The first is simply to lie down and leave your fate to God. The second method is a bit more effective: choose a sleeping partner. But the protagonist didn't expect everyone to turn him down, which made him pissed off. Though he gets angry at almost anything, suddenly someone calls out to him. It's a guy who is smiling, and his name is Hans. He asks if the protagonist is really looking for a sleeping partner, but then he explains that it's just for taking care of each other while sleeping. Our protagonist quickly agrees and introduces himself, saying, "I'm Bjorn, son of Jettel." The guy shakes his hand in a romantic manner and says, "It would have been better if there were 3 of us." Then, blushing, he asks, "Are we really just the 2 of us?" Bro, I don't like this guy's intentions. The protagonist feels like smashing his head in, but he holds himself back because he needs some nighttime company. The 2 play rock, paper, scissors, and Hans wins, so he'll sleep first. As usual, the protagonist gets pissed off. This time, due to his bad luck, Hans says, "Here, take this watch. When the pointer reaches here, wake me up." Got it? Or should I explain it again? Want a drawing? The protagonist thinks, "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Yes, that's the common impression people have about barbarians. But then Hans actually falls asleep. The protagonist is sitting there, thinking whether he should ask to borrow Hans' sleeping bag. He also hopes no goblin will come. Time passes, and finally, he wakes Hans up. Hans thanks him for doing a good job and says it's now his turn to sleep for 2 hours. But obviously, the protagonist won't be able to sleep. How can he trust an unknown guy? So, the protagonist pretends to snore as if he's asleep. He wonders if Hans is going to betray him. To appear clueless, he turns his back to him and just waits to see when Hans will attack. But Hans does nothing. Now, it's the protagonist's turn to stand guard. Not a single moment of sleep for him. He starts losing his sanity, wondering why Hans hasn't done anything. Then he thinks he should have trusted him a little, and slowly, he begins to fall asleep. Suddenly, he wakes up with a loud scream, and both of them just stare at each other. The protagonist says, "I didn't even realize when I fell asleep." Hans replies, "First, clean your mouth." Lucky for us, no one attacked while we were sleeping. The protagonist says, "Sorry, man," and tells him that if he wants to sleep more, he can, and he'll watch. But Hans happily says, "No need. You can sleep now. I'll keep watch." The protagonist thanks him. Hans stays with his trademark smile the whole time. The protagonist offers him a real-life deal and doesn't blame him for falling asleep. He refuses to switch shifts when the mistake was his. He knows that people like him don't exist in the Dungeons and Stone game. As soon as the Bjorn opens his eyes, Hans asks if the protagonist is awake and, holding a giant hammer, asks if the protagonist wants to sleep a little more. But at that moment, if the protagonist hadn't dodged, he would have been crushed right there. He quickly jumps to the side, and the guy can't believe that he dodged. It seems like he triggered the anger of someone whose mind wasn't all there. The protagonist attacks him with full hatred, and the guy tells him to stop. He then strikes him with his shield, cracking his head open. The guy repeatedly says to stop, claiming he can explain, but in the protagonist's mind, this guy is like a goblin who wouldn't fall with just one hit, so he strikes him again. The guy falls 2 meters away and begins to crawl, just like the protagonist did at the beginning of the story. The guy keeps apologizing, but the protagonist just wants to know why he did it. The guy reveals that he was planning to knock him out and steal his magic stone. He then talks about taking the shield and other equipment because he could sell it for a good sum. The protagonist asks, "Is that all?" The guy replies, "Yes, now let me go." The protagonist doesn't think this will happen. This is the last chance he's giving the guy to tell the truth. Fearfully, the guy admits that he wanted a heart. The barbarian is confused and doesn't understand, but the guy explains that the barbarian's heart sells for a lot of money and seems to be used as raw material for magical items. In simple words, the protagonist was nothing more than a goblin to him. If the guy had killed him, it would have benefited him, but now the protagonist wants to know why he acted now and not when he was asleep. The reason is that the guy also needed to sleep. He says, "Now that I've told you everything, will you let me go?" The protagonist knows that more people like him will come. So will he keep letting them go? The guy says that he's not like the others, but the protagonist just picks up his shield. This is the first person he has killed with his own hands. He hasn't even been in this new world for a day, and already he's taken a life. With that, the protagonist equips shoulder pads, increasing his item level to 13. He then equips a backpack, increasing his inventory space, and a hammer, which raises his item level to 30. He also puts on boots. This means he's equipped all of Hans's gear. I've already mentioned that Hans was a true friend. He gave the barbarian some cool items. Let's thank him. Thank you, Hans. You're a true friend. Because of him, the protagonist has stepped out of his primitive life. Now, he has water, medicine, and even a watch to check the time. Here's the current state of our barbarian. He's now wreaking havoc on goblins, and the big hammer is really coming in handy. The next day, goblins start appearing in groups that he can handle, but there's a problem. They aren't the goblins. He easily takes care of them. The problem now is sleep. He leans against a wall to relax, but at that moment, the goblins arrive, thinking he's asleep. This makes him furious. He says he doesn't even get 10 minutes of rest and crushes them all. After clearing everyone out, he says, "Now I'll take a nap," but suddenly a system message appears that a goblin attacked him while he was asleep. Literally, a large goblin is stabbing a knife into his chest. He wakes up with a jolt, slaps the goblin away, and sends him flying. Another goblin, seeing his friend flying about 80 kilometers per hour, notices that the protagonist is angry and quickly runs away. The protagonist thought he would wake up gradually, but now he has to heal his wounds. The barbarian says that potion stabs hurt more than the wounds themselves and uses a potion. It's been 14 hours since he killed Hans, and now he's thinking of finding a new nighttime companion. However, unlike the previous day, everyone now wants him on their team, probably because he looks a little cleaner. Who knows, but anyone who passes by invites him. However, today, he himself declines and says that he will stay with his own race, meaning with the barbarians. As he walks through the dungeon, he notices an elf sitting in a corner. Obviously, she notices him and gets scared. According to the system, the protagonist has found an injured elf. He immediately asks her if she is hurt, which makes her more alert. When he looks at her closely, he realizes he didn't notice it earlier. He asks her if humans injured her. As he gets closer, the elf kneels and starts apologizing. The barbarian is completely confused, and she keeps saying that she just wants to be forgiven just this once because she needs to take care of her little brother. This makes the protagonist even more confused because it's not normal for an elf to behave like this. Elves in the game were usually very cold. But still, he smiles and says, "Don't be afraid, my dear elf. I have no intention of killing you." The elf is shocked and keeps saying that she knows he is a barbarian. But is he really going to do it? Can he really let her go this time? Now, protagonist starts getting angry and asks why she is so scared. Then he gives her some items for healing and says that they will talk later. These items are healing leaves that barbarians give to their old companions. She asks her if he needs a reason for help. He says, "Do I need a reason to protect you? Take care of your wounds." Obviously, he has a reason to help her because he also needs a nighttime companion, and honestly, the wound looks pretty huge. It seems like he has never seen such a huge, if you know what I mean. But despite being so badly injured and without sleep, her appearance is still decent. This makes it even harder for her to find a nighttime companion compared to him. They introduce each other, and we learn that the elf's name is Erwin. Now, protagonist wants to know why she is so scared of him. She says it's because he is an elf and he is a barbarian. What does this mean? She explains that they are their mortal enemies, but this is different from the game, where it wasn't mentioned. Soon, she regrets and says that actually the war ended 10 years ago and she doesn't have any issues with barbarians. In short, she just doesn't want to fight. Up until now, protagonist thought he knew everything about this world, but now he realizes that this world is different from the game, and there is a lot he doesn't know about it. Hearing this, he becomes a little worried, but the elf girl is happy when our hero says that it doesn't matter to him either. But actually, he wants her to be his nighttime companion. He is very tired, and maybe she is too, so why not cooperate? She thinks about it and remembers that barbarians value their honor above all else. So, she asks him to swear on his warrior's honor that he won't do anything to her. As usual, this makes him a little angry, but he agrees when she says she will swear as well. He swears, "I swear on the honor of my father," whose name he already forgotten. "I swear on my warrior's honor." Then the elf swears too, and this non-aggression vow is fulfilled between them, at least for the night. He says that he will sleep first, as maybe this will make him feel safer. She says she has no problem with it, and this time she gives him her watch, saying that he should take care of it because it's expensive. He lies down and thinks he will pretend to snore and sleep for about 10 minutes to confirm, but suddenly he wakes up in shock because he had actually fallen asleep. He asks how long he has been asleep, and she says 2 hours. He says it's because of the sleeping bag and blankets left by their friend Hans. Now, he feels obliged to give them to her, and she is very happy. Finally, she falls asleep, and maybe she was as tired as their barbarian. It feels like weeks have passed in this game, but in reality, only 3 days have passed since he arrived here. This makes him wonder what might have happened to his body in the real world. Well, as far as he remembers, his body was pulled into a monitor, but he has no idea. When he checks the watch, he realizes there are only 10 minutes left to wake the sleeping beauty. This makes him worry, as he doesn't know what to do with her now. Should he join her and share all the loot from the third day, because the game is now sending goblins in groups instead of singles? He says he can handle up to 4 goblins, but the problem is still sleep, because if he joins her, he will have to divide the loot. But if he doesn't join her, he will have to find another nighttime companion the next day. Suddenly, he sees 2 humans coming toward him. They are already whispering, "Isn't this the elf we've been looking for?" One says, "Yes, this is her." Blondie comes up and asks what his relationship with the elf is. He answers in a friendly manner that she is his nighttime companion, but when Blondie asks how long they will be together, he gets furious and says he won't answer. This scares the 2 of them, and they run away. If I saw such a face, I'd freeze in fear too, he thinks. The barbarian understands they are looking for the elf and realizes it's time to wake her up. When he does, she slyly says, "Just 5 more minutes," and pulls the blanket over herself. But this makes protagonist realize she was pretending to be asleep because the blanket was loose before, and now she is holding it. Suddenly he feels a pull. Protagonist pulls her up and sits her like a child. This guy has truly become a barbarian. He directly asks her why she was pretending to sleep, and she sadly replies that if she woke up, he would probably leave her since they only made a deal for the night. Protagonist understands now why she was pretending, because as soon as she opened her eyes, their agreement would end, and she would have to survive alone again. But before that, he asks her what connection she has with the 2 men, and she firmly says that there is no connection. However, protagonist doesn't understand how they recognized her, and she admits that she might be from the clan that tried to hurt her. At least their clothes had the symbol of the Crystal Union clan. He immediately understands that joining them might be dangerous because the whole clan is after her, but seeing that she is only 20, he asks her to come with him so they can talk while walking. She asks if he will help her, and he says he wants to hear the whole story first. The elf girl gets excited, and she begins telling her story. She explains that she met the man on the first day of her journey, and he became her nighttime companion. But something fell off, so she opened her eyes and saw that the man had his hand in an odd position near her. He was telling her to sleep a little longer. Later, she found out that he was a manager of a clan that did business on the first floor. She continues that she somehow escaped that day, but her clan members are still chasing her, and she got an arrow in her abdomen. Now, protagonist wants to know how they are able to track her. She tells him that she thinks they use a message stone to keep tracking her. A message stone is a mystical device that allows communication within a range of about 300 meters once synchronized. It's like a walkie-talkie. He understands that if he leaves her, she will be captured, but it doesn't seem like she has done anything wrong.